Hi everybody, welcome to July's So Fun. My name is Audrey and I'm going to walk you through our projects. Don't forget that we're doing things a little bit differently this month. You will need to go to the website and download your wish list so you can follow along with all of the projects and notions and mark off what you'd like to get. Kimberbell just released this Kimberbell Curated Citrus and Sunshine collection. It has a ton of cute designs. I think there's 11 projects total on here. In hoop sizes from 4x4 on up, so any embroidery machine can do them. The ones that I did, I started with this little lemon basket. It definitely turned out smaller than I expected to. It is meant for a 6x10 embroidery field. So when you're stitching out this basket, or there are two other square baskets in the collection, just be aware that even if it uses a larger hoop, these sides have to fold up, so it's going to end up a little bit smaller than expected. It stitches on wash away stabilizer. I use 2 layers of wash away just about any time that I use it, just for extra stability. And then let's see here, there are little buttonholes on each of these flanges that your ribbon is going to go through to hold everything together. There are these 2 little freestanding leaves to really finish off the lemon feeling. So that's the little lemon easy peasy basket. There are also a couple of itty bitty embroidery hoop designs. These fit in the 4x4 field. So there's this one that says, "You are my sunshine." There is also one that says, "You're the zest" on it. And it's just got a little applique sun down here. The rest of it is regular stitching. Be aware it is raw edge applique. So Kimberbell suggests that you use a woven fusible interfacing on the back to keep it from fraying too much. I did not finish off the back of this one. It's going to go against a wall, so I'm not too worried about it. There are instructions for finishing off the back, or you could really just as easily hot glue a piece of felt over it if you want it to look a little bit cleaner. So that's the "You Are My Sunshine" hoop. And finally for this set is "Sunshine on a Cloudy Day." This project in the design collection is actually meant to go on a tote bag, one of Kimberbell's already unassembled tote bags that you can purchase. I don't need more tote bags in my life, so I just took the design and put it on a tea towel. This particular design does come in 3 different sizes. So this is for an 8x8 hoop, that's the largest size. There are 2 smaller sizes as well. Again, it's raw edge applique, so be aware of that. It's going to fray a little bit more, especially if it gets used a lot. It's going to be mostly decorative. And then I chose to use some of that matte thread on here, so it's not as shiny, it's not going to be as obnoxious under my kitchen lights, and it's not going to catch my dog's eye. So that's the "Sunshine on a Cloudy Day" tea towel in my case. I ordered in this book Lunch Hour Embroidery. It has 130 different hand embroidery designs in it from A to Z. It's organized with each letter and then matching designs. For example, you have the J page, which has a jellyfish, jam jar, and a jet. I'm, to be honest, not much of a hand embroiderer, but I like these books for practicing digitizing with my digitizing software. I am a big machine embroiderer. So I did a little bit of both to show you guys what hand embroidery versus machine embroidery looks like and how you can do a lot of different things with those designs. So first off, this is just something I did hand embroidery during my workday on my downtime. So this is the mushroom, part of the M page. For hand embroidery, I did just do regular back stitch and some satin stitches for a little bit of extra texture. Don't look too close, I am not a hand embroiderer. And I just did it on a cotton canvas material, something sturdy, so I didn't have to try and hoop it. And then I will cut this out and stitch it onto some jeans or a denim jacket as a patch later. What's nice, if you're a beginner at hand embroidery like I am, the beginning of the book has instructions for different hand embroidery stitches, how to finish off your projects, things like that. So if you're wanting to try hand embroidery, this is a great book to start with. If you're wanting to do more digitizing with them, you have endless options. So these are all of my test stitches of that same mushroom. Starting at the bottom here, I just did a running stitch one to match kind of what's already in the book. So it's very light. I didn't have to make any adjustments after my first test stitch. I just adjusted how thick the bean stitch was. So some of these, it only goes over the bean 3 times. Some of them are up to, I think, a 9-ply was the heaviest I did to really make it pop. So if you're a beginner at digitizing, running stitches are a great way to start. They're pretty easy to just trace the design that you pull in. Then we have a fill stitch design. So again, I just traced exactly this. This was my first stitch out. You can probably kind of see from there, I tried a different kind of fill. There are all sorts of different fills built into all of the digitizing software. This one is like a radial fill, and it turned out way thick in the middle, which I wasn't expecting. So after I stitched it out and checked all the rest of the stitches too for density, I don't want to have to stitch things out a million times, I went back into my software and adjusted that. So this was the first try on the fill stitch. And then we have something a little bit more complex, is an applique. Applique, depending on how your brain wraps around different parts needing to stack on top of each other, could be easy or it could be a little bit harder. For this one, you can kind of see and this is why we do our test stitch out, didn't have my layers quite right, so my stem here actually stitched after this red part went down. So that was one of the things I was looking for when I stitched this out. It was also just to see, like, these little pieces here were kind of tiny in my opinion for doing applique, so I changed that up. So after those test stitches, I came up with my final ones. The fill stitch, I just changed that to a regular fill with a random pattern instead of the radial, and it worked much better. I increased the density a little bit. And then sometimes you have to adjust how much your pieces overlap to actually meet or cover each other like they should. Stitches are going to pull in, so just something to keep in mind. And then same thing, applique. I changed these little tiny ones to satin stitches because I thought they were too small for applique. And also fixed the layering so that my stems were underneath of the mushroom caps. So just things to keep in mind. And once I was happy with them, finished product here, I put it on just a tea towel, something simple. I decided to offset it on the corner so that I can just hang it up using the built-in hanger rather than draping it over my oven, which I don't do that. That's just not how my kitchen works. So that is a little quick intro to digitizing and some of the things to think about and look for. And again, that was the lunch hour embroidery book. So lately there's been more of a push for eco-friendly products in our lives in general. So one of those big areas where there's a lot of waste is Ziploc bags. So in my effort to kind of decrease some of that, I picked this Sadie sweet sacks pattern. It's a very quick, easy make. They are about 6 inches square. They have a Velcro closure and a gusseted bottom, so they will sit upright. And then the best part is, I know some of you are thinking it's a cloth bag. If I put like carrots or something wet in there, it's just going to seep through and get all messy. They are vinylized. Way to put it. So on this one, I did vinyl on the inside and the outside. One of our products this month is a vinyl slicker. So it's an iron-on vinyl that you can apply to whatever cotton fabric you have on hand. So I've put it on the inside and the outside of this one, so it's a little bit stiffer, a little bit heavier than the other one. But I thought that would be easier to clean because then I can wipe out the inside and I can wipe off the outside. The pattern itself, it's just one long rectangle with 2 pieces of fabric sewn together. You can either sew them right sides together and turn it for fully finished edges, and that's what I've chosen to do, or you can serge the edges on your serger if you want an even faster make. And then you're just going to sew Velcro to one side and fold over the other end to create your flap. and then it goes through the whole process, but you make kind of a pleat in the middle to create your gusseted pocket, and then just stitch down the sides. These come together in like 30 minutes, including putting the vinyl on. So that one I did vinyl on the inside and outside. This one I only did vinyl on the inside, and I left the outside plain so that I could put some embroidery on it. These little blank sacks are the perfect vessel for embroidery designs. So I embroidered it first, and this is another one of the designs I digitized from the lunch hour embroidery. And then I trimmed up my fabric after embroidering and put it together. So putting on the vinyl is really easy. I have a little sample of it, let me talk about. So the vinylized side and then the plain side. The vinyl has a paper backing on it. It's got a grid on it so you can easily measure out how much you need. I recommend measuring out just a little bit larger than the piece of fabric you're applying it to in case things shift. When you peel off the backing paper, it's slightly sticky, but it's not going to permanently adhere as soon as you put it on the fabric. So once you place your vinyl down, if it's not quite right, you can move it, you can adjust it until it's perfect. And then either using a Teflon pressing sheet, which is what I did, or you can use the paper backing from the vinyl as a pressing sheet. Put that over top of the vinyl. You don't want it melting to your iron, that's no fun. And then just press it on medium-high heat. It adhered really quickly, and it has been super permanent. It's been a little while since I made these now, and it's not peeling up or anything on my little sample here. So those are the Sadie sweet sacks. Aprons are a super popular kind of beginner project for sewists, but you see mostly the full-length aprons worn in kitchens. You don't see a lot of half aprons. I think maybe that's because people think they're too simple. So when I saw the crisscross pocket apron, and it also has a pot holder and matching gift bag, I thought that was the perfect apron for wearing in my sewing room. It's got these nice deep pockets, and they're super cute with this little crisscross accent here. The pockets themselves are easy to sew. You can see the lining is the same as my accent on each of the pockets. So to make these little crisscross, it's actually just 2 half square triangles sewn together with your accent fabric slightly larger. And then when you fold them over, you fold the seam allowance up here, and that becomes your accent. And then it's just a matter of putting it on each of these squares. They are made in separate panels, so there's 4 separate panels all sewn together, and then finish to hold it together and hold it closed with some buttons. I made this one completely out of scraps that I already had in my sewing room. Kind of picked the one that I had the most of, that I wanted to be my focus fabric, and picked smaller scraps to work from there to accent it with. So this is also a great project for using up those single buttons in your button stash if you're like me and you just have a collection of weird and funky buttons that you're not going to use on like clothing or anything a little more formal or matchy-matchy. And then the tie looks pretty simple, but I liked the way it was attached. So there's a front and a back to the tie, so it's all completely finished off. You take the front of the tie and stitch it right sides together to the top of your main apron piece here. And then press that up so the seam allowance is going down. And then you take the back part of your tie, lay it over top, right sides together, stitch around everything except for the top of the apron, turn it right side out, and then top stitch that opening closed. So it encases that seam, it's extra sturdy, and it was really easy to do. So I liked that. And then finally, the best part of this pattern is throughout the instructions, there are QR codes that you can scan with your phone to get extra instruction or videos from the author of the pattern itself. So the crisscross pocket apron, oven mitt, and gift bag. The Arenite pants by Liberated have a really unique silhouette to them. That's what drew me to them in the first place. Easy to dress up or dress down. And then the pattern is great because it includes sizes 0 to 24. So just about anything in the gamut of sizes. For reference, I made a size 16. I didn't have to make any adjustments to the pattern in my first fitting of it. It was perfect. It's also a pretty flattering fit, like there's ease and a lot of adjustability in the elastic waist. And then finally, there are 3 different cuffs for the bottom of the pants. So you can have just a plain cuff. There is a knit cuff option, which is a little bit taller. And then there is the elasticized cuff, which is what I have done on my pants here. So the silhouette of the pants is made with this wide pocket here, so they stick out a little bit just to give a more interesting look. If you don't like how they hang out though, there is the option in the pattern to put a pleat in them so they fit a little more closely to the body. So it's meant to be a slightly baggier fit that fits right over kind of your waistline, natural waist or belly button area. The front of the pants features a flat felled seam. And what I really appreciate about the pattern is it walks you through the different garment construction techniques that she's talking about. So she tells you to flat fell this seam, and then she also tells you how to flat fell a seam. So if you're not familiar with garment construction, you've never made one of those before, it walks through exactly how that's done, and it's super easy. If you're not familiar with flat felling, you're actually sewing your pieces together wrong sides together. So the seam is on the outside, and then essentially you fold one side of the seam over the other and top stitch it down. So it's a little bit sturdier. You'll see them on the sides of jeans most often. So it's got 4 flat felled seams on the front and back of each pant leg. These nice deep pockets, which we are so often gypped on in women's pants, so I really appreciate the deep pockets. And then the elastic waist, you want to make sure you use the soft waistband elastic, because the non-rolling elastic is going to be really hard to stretch out and sew through. And to get this kind of ruched effect, you are going to feed your elastic through, check and make sure it's the right size, and then as you sew, you'll stretch out your elastic so that this lays nice and flat as you feed it through the machine. It's a little bit of an arm workout, but just call that my exercise for the week. So this pattern, like most garment patterns, uses a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Something to be aware of, especially if you're new to garment construction. So I like to mark my seam allowance on my pattern pieces as I'm cutting them out and tracing them. So I used the Cut Right Handy Gauge. It's this neon green little tool that has a bunch of different seam allowance sizes on it. Made it super easy to just line up, make my little marks, just do a dash line around my pattern pieces. But I like to put them on there so that as I'm making my first fitting piece of this, I can easily adjust where the stitch line is. Because that's what really matters when you're sewing, is where the stitch line is. That's what makes the shape of your garment, not necessarily the cut line. If your stitches are wavy, that's going to make a difference. If your cutting is wavy, not so much. So I like to mark the seam allowance on there so I can just easily move that over a 1/2 inch or whatever I need to for fitting. As far as fitting these went, I didn't have to make any adjustments to the waist or the width of the legs or anything. The only adjustment I actually had to make was to the length. The inseam length on each size is the same for some reason. I don't necessarily think that's the smartest choice, but it's how the pattern was drafted. So I had to add 2 inches at the bottom of my pants to make them the right length and actually hit me at the ankles instead of like clam diggers. But otherwise, came together easy. This is a pattern you want to choose a drapey fabric for. So this is like a faux linen look material, look really nice in a rayon or a tencel. Just make sure it's not a stiff fabric, otherwise the pockets are gonna look funny. It's just how it is. So those are the Arenite pants. Grainline Studios Archer button-up shirt is apparently the holy grail of button-up shirt patterns, according to the internet. Everybody loves it. I loved making it. It does have 2 different versions. So there is a version with a ruffle in the back, and then a version that just has your standard pleat underneath the yoke. And both versions have slightly different cuffs. One just has straight cuffs, one has angled cuffs. So I made the version with the regular pleated back. I thought a ruffle was a little too much. And when it says angled cuffs, all it means is that there's this little notch cut out here where the button comes together. So instead of just being plain square. The pattern includes sizes 0 through 18. I made a size 16, and again, when I did my fitting, I didn't have to make any adjustments to this pattern. Everything fit exactly like I wanted it to. The pattern is going to work great with just about any kind of woven fabric. You could do something silky and soft like I did. You could do a flannel shirt if you want something more casual, a cotton print if you want something funky. It's really, the possibilities are endless with this. So as I pointed out, I did a slinky soft fabric. As I was cutting it out, I was worried it might have been a little too slippery for some of the more difficult or structured parts of this pattern. So like the cuffs, the pocket, things like that. So I decided to grab this black chiffon that I already had in my stash to use as an accent on those pieces that I wanted to be a little more structured. So worked great for the collar, the button placket, and then the cuffs. Just to give it a little bit of extra stability so I wasn't fighting with this slippery slidey fabric while I was also trying to fold and pin and make a collar. One important safety note when making this pattern, it calls for a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So be aware of that. She does call that out at the beginning of the pattern instructions, but if you're a skimmer like I am, you could easily overlook that. So be aware, it calls for a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It's not the standard garment seam allowance. I don't know when we started moving away from that. While reading through the pattern, the author does expect you to have some familiarity with garment construction terminology. So if she tells you to grade your seams, for example, she just expects that you're going to know what that means. Easily remedied by Googling things if you're slightly newer. So there's lots of resources. Don't let that deter you. The pattern is still easy to follow, even with that expectation. The other nice thing about this pattern is it's so popular online that there are several sew-alongs and blogs who go through in depth how to construct the shirt. So you'll find tons of help online with that. The only things that I ran into trouble with were sewing the cuffs on. So the cuffs are actually a large piece that's folded in half, burrito style or hot dog style, if you will, and then stitched onto the sleeve here. My cuffs ended up a little long for the width of the sleeve. I'm not sure if that was probably my fault while I was making the sleeve placket here. Things end up getting just a little off kilter sometimes. Didn't make a huge difference in the long run, because when you get to the part where you're going to stitch the sides together, it's actually down around the sleeve like this, and I just started my stitching right where the sleeve placket was. So I wasn't worried about the seam allowance there. I started it where it needed to line up, and it worked out beautifully. The collar is in 3 pieces. So there's the top collar piece, there's a bottom, which is cut on the bias so that it folds nicely, and then the collar stand is a separate piece as well. Her instructions are super easy to follow. It's all top stitched in place so it stays nicely. The little button band, I guess, here at the bottom of the collar, it's a little tricky to sew only because to get it nice and stitched to your button placket here, you do have to do a trick with folding the fabric wrong sides out around the button placket and stitching about 1 inch there. It's hard to explain in words, it's hard to explain in text. There are videos and again those sew-alongs, and she actually tells you that there's a sew-along in the pattern that you can reference for these harder parts. The only thing I don't like about it now that I finished it, I think it's because of this slightly stretchy, slinky fabric I chose, When I tried it on at the very end, the sleeves are about a cuff length too long on me, and my original fitting pattern had not turned out that way. So I can either wear them with the cuffs rolled up, or if I really want to, I can shorten the sleeves. I'll probably just wear it with the cuffs rolled up and it'll be fine. So be aware of that if you're working with something kind of slinky. Test fit the sleeves before you sew the placket on, because that's what's going to prevent me from wanting to shorten the sleeves, is the placket is kind of a fiddly little binding bit. And that is the Archer button-up. The Garment Making Book of Knowledge. This is a technique and info book. This book is chock full of knowledge and information all about making garments. It's 253 pages of information about different tools that you can use in sewing. There's a section on what to look for if you're in the market for a new machine and you're focused on making clothes. There is a whole section even on serger stitches, using those for garment making, which is usually what they're used for. It's most common. There's, let's see, little mini lessons that cover everything from different kinds of necklines. I'm trying to find another one in here. Yeah, there's 2 knit necklines. There's a mini lesson on pockets. There are some patternless garment ideas at the very beginning. One of my favorite sections is on what to look for when you're choosing a pattern, kind of the hallmarks of what's going to be a good pattern. She says avoid things that are completely made out of straight lines, because that's not how a body is built. It's completely true. There's, let's look at a whole chapter on fitting a flat pattern, including a chart for marking down your personal measurements for future reference, and just a whole plethora of knowledge. At the back, there's a kind of glossary on terms. The only thing that I thought was a little weird, she does start the book talking about why you should sew garments, and I feel like that's a little redundant, because anybody who's going to pick this kind of book up probably already sews or has an interest in sewing garments. But everything else in here, that's maybe 2 pages, everything else in here is great knowledge. It's a good reference to have if you're a beginner garment sewist, or if you've been sewing garments for years. There's probably still something new that you can learn in here. So that's the Garment Making Book of Knowledge. Thanks for joining us for Sew Fun. I hope you'll join us again for the next one to see the rest of the projects that I have to show you.